My name's Jonathan Pyle. I'm the developer of Docassemble. I'm an attorney at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, so I come from the legal aid world. But we have people from all walks of life here at this training this morning, which is great. But this is the Quinten and Sam show, so I'll turn it over to them to do the beginner training.
So what we're going to do today is just really meat and potatoes. We're going to go through several exercises to help you learn the basics of Docassemble. When you leave today, hopefully you'll be able to feel really comfortable diving right in and doing your own Docassemble development. And thank you everybody who saw the survey, by the way. That was really great to get all those responses. Saw we had people from, as Jonathan said, from all over the world, from all different types of organizations, and all different kinds of interests, although there were definitely some shared interests that people have for how they want to use Docassemble. Great to see the things people are planning to do and all of your hopes, and I'm hoping we'll be able to touch on those. We had 13 people who responded, about a third who are in small organizations, law firms, or other organizations that represent people. Lots of nonprofits and independent developers, people from government agencies, law schools, and more, startups in the startup world. Great representation from Colombia, it seems. That's our second largest number of country representatives.
The country as opposed to the university, yeah.
Colombia, the country, yes, not the university, good point. And overwhelmingly, dogs seem to be the most preferred animal, which that was a surprise.
I'm going to remove you all from the Zoom unless you prefer cats. Sorry.
So I'm really excited to get started today. A couple of housekeeping things. One is, if you have not already signed up for an account on training.docassemble.org, which I will put in the Slack, and you do not have your own Docassemble server, you should do that right now. And I'm going to put the link in there. Let me give you the actual sign up link. Let's see. Hold on. Give that directly to everybody. And one of us will activate your account so that you have developer rights as well. It's kind of a two-step process there. Feel free, if you have a Docassemble server, to use your existing server. This server is only going to be around for a couple of days, so you'll want to make sure to save your work after that and download it in some way. The second thing is, we're going to be following along on some materials that developing at Suffolk University Law School, where I teach. And I'm going to link those to you as well, so you can see, you can follow along with our class materials. So a lot of the exercises and code snippets are going to be right there for you to use. So let me grab that URL for you as well.
Before I forget, there is another session at 2 about gathering groups of things like lists. And there's a happy hour at 4, which you're all welcome to attend. We don't have any agenda. We'll just chat as best we can over Zoom.
I've been told it's not good to give people the materials to look at too early, so I'm going to trust you all to not try to read ahead too much. So as I said, I'm currently a professor at Suffolk University Law School, adjunct professor and clinical fellow. I also run a consulting business with Jason Morris, who was on the call yesterday, some of you might have seen, and I've done lots of projects with Sam Harden, who's an independent developer. Before that, I was at Greater Boston Legal Services for about 12 years as a legal aid attorney and a software developer there. So I'm going to let Sam introduce himself, and Sam's also going to kick off our first session.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thanks for being on a Friday morning or Friday afternoon. Your chat, you're in the UK, so good afternoon to you. I am an attorney in Florida. I'm also a computer developer. I am now a program manager at Pro Bono Net, which is a new development for me. Before that, I was an independent consultant doing development work and product and project management for legal aid organizations, the Florida Bar Foundation, and the Florida Justice Technology Center, as well as Measures for Justice. Before that, I did litigation, both civil and criminal, which I hated with a passion. So I'm very happy to be a consultant and now a program manager for Pro Bono Net and work on stuff that I like. So again, thanks everybody for being here. Today's sessions are going to be starting at a very basic level, you know, introducing the docassemble playground, which is like its console, going through some exercises, just kind of building on things and introducing concepts that are intrinsic to docassemble as well as different programming languages. So if you're familiar with, you know, Python or other programming languages, you'll recognize stuff. But we're assuming that the people on the call don't have a lot of experience with docassemble. You know, so feel free to chime in with questions at any point in the chat, and we'll respond to those as best we can. Our format today is just kind of, we're going to go through stuff, and, you know, again, if you have questions, just ask. You know, we'll try to answer those as we go along. You know, so hopefully we have some fun and we learn some stuff, and thank you all for being here. So Quinten, do you want to let me share my screen real quick, or do you want to share yours?
Oh, yeah, I think you should be able to share your screen, I hope.
There we go.
And I just wanted to add one more thing, which is we have a pretty good group of people here, a lot of folks. So I think we probably will work for you to just unmute yourself and talk. But if you're more comfortable with using the chat, Sam and I will take turns surfacing those. So feel free to use the chat as another way to ask your questions.
All right. Let me move all the embarrassing Chrome tabs out of the way here. All right, can you all see my screen? Am I showing the docassemble playground?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So what we're going to be starting out with is just a very simple introduction to the docassemble playground and creating a hello world script. And if you've done any programming, you're probably familiar with hello world. It's the first thing that you learn how to do when learning a new programming language is have your machine respond back to you, hello world. There's a story behind it, and I never really remember what it is, but that's just kind of what you do. So as an introduction, if you've signed up for the docassemble instance and have been gotten developer privileges, this is the playground for docassemble, and you can get there by clicking on your username up at the top right and going over to playground. And so just quickly, I wanted to go over kind of the parts of the playground so that everybody's familiar with it. This is the default interview that it loads with when you see it for the first time. So up at the top here, we have some controls. You can add a new interview with this guy. It has different folders that we'll go over later where you can load in different parts of your interview, the templates that it's going to use to create documents. And then you can see what interview file that you're going to be using here. You can also upload interview files if you'd like. This section here is the coding section. It's not really similar to a console, but this is where you're going to write your interview questions. You'll see every line is numbered, and then that the section does text highlighting as well, blue, purple, red, things like that, which is super helpful for being able to visually cue in on the different parts of questions and code and interviews and things like that. Over here at the right, you see a window with all of your variables that are available to use. A lot of these are loaded in from the standard docassemble packages. So we can kind of ignore these for now, but we can go over that as we go. Down here at the bottom, you see your save and run, download and delete buttons. Save just saves the interview that you're writing. Save and run will save it and begin to run it in a new tab. Download lets you download it as a YAML file, this .yml, and then delete lets you delete it. Down at the bottom, you have example blocks, which I find incredibly helpful. This is one of the best features of Docassemble, where you can see, and because I forget stuff, every 5 minutes, but okay, how do I do, this common thing that I always have to do, but I can't ever remember what it is, like put text under the question. You can see it here, source code, as an example. And then you can just insert that into your interview up at the top by clicking the insert button. So this is super helpful, and we'll go over this in a little bit more detail later. So does anybody have any questions about the console? Does that make sense to everybody?
So I'm just going to surface Adam's question for people who aren't looking at the chat. So Adam asked, is this the default appearance of Docassemble, or has it been customized?
So this is how it appears out of the box. One of the things that we'll talk about later is how to customize the appearance of the Docassemble system using different Bootstrap templates or CSS files. One thing that's a nice feature is if you click in the editing screen here, and I believe if you hit F11, you can get it full screen, which is kind of a nice feature to be able to see everything, because sometimes that window is a little bit small. To get back, just hit F11 again. But yeah, this is the standard default appearance, and this is a standard Bootstrap template that's implemented.
One more question this might be a good time to check to see if anybody's having trouble getting into the playground, if they've been able to create their account and if they're logged in and are able to follow along with the exercises so far. I see 36 accounts and 63 people who are signed up in our Zoom right now. So I'm guessing there are some people who have their own servers, but maybe some people who want an account and haven't done it yet. So I guess maybe feel free to use the participant menu and raise your hand if you need some help. We can take a second, because I want to make sure that people can follow along now. Or otherwise, use the chat, some way to let us know if you want us to take a minute to make sure you can get logged in. Okay, so seeing a couple of questions so far. No one about having problems logging in. Caroline asked, is there a shortcut to not do word wrap in the playground? I think the answer is no. Maybe Jonathan, you can answer that in a second. Another question from Adam was, can the default install host multiple users? Yes, it can. We at Suffolk, we have like 20 or 30 people who are using it simultaneously. That works great for that.
Yeah, and the question about Mirabella and Mandy about F11, I'm using a Mac, and it might be different for Windows users. Quinten, do you know?
It is the same. So one thing that you have to do is click into the editing area before you press F11. Another question David asked, are we all editing the same file? No, you look here in the, actually it's not telling you right here in this URL, but each person has their own separate kind of, and playground is really the right word. It's kind of like a sandbox space that you can feel free to play around with completely without anyone else being able to see it.
Yeah.
And you can make your own changes without affecting anybody else. Mandy asks, is there a reference for the shortcut keys? The answer is, I don't think there really is, but that's really the main one you have to know. It's kind of a useful feature when you're doing a big editing, something really long, but it's not something I use all the time because there are other editors you can use too. You're not stuck using this playground. This is just one way for you to interact with your code.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have a code editor that you like I use Atom as just a generic editor, you can edit your YAML file in Atom locally and then upload it if you want to. The only issue is you don't get the handy error reporting that's like a live feature when you're editing it locally.
A couple of great shares on the chat. Glad to see people are using it that way. It's really great. Continue to do that, please. A great question from Liana is, what's the best way to collaborate with others? So that's always evolving. I have had my students do some really creative things, like using Google Docs as their collaborative editor, which is fine. It was a tool they already knew how to use, and we didn't have to teach. I think the best tool, which we won't get into in today's sessions at all, is GitHub. And you can use GitHub right from inside the Docassemble playground. There's a really nice workflow you can use where you can make sure you're not breaking each other's code. And it takes a little bit of work to use, but we have law students who are doing it in our summer program at Suffolk right now, and picked it up pretty quickly. So I definitely think it's possible for people to do that. But a little beyond the scope of what we're going to try and do today. Probably you can learn it in like an hour or two, that functionality. I think that's covering most of the questions. By the way, I'll just share this with everybody. So all of the materials that are on that website are open, released under a Creative Commons license. So feel free to use those with attribution. And if you make any changes, please do share them back so we can make it better for everybody. But they are free for people to use in any non-commercial way, including teaching your own university class. All right, no one has said they've had trouble getting logged into the playground, so that's great. So I'll stop interrupting. Yeah. Let Sam keep going with the presentation.
All right. So again, if anybody has questions, post them in the chat, or just feel free to speak out. So what we're going to do now is our first exercise, which is Hello World. And I'm just going to click the Add button to add a new interview here. And you'll see that it just blanks everything out for me. So we need to start with a name. So we'll name it Hello World. And two important notes here. When you're naming a file, you can't have spaces between the letters or numbers in the name. And you always need to add the .yml to the end of the file name because it doesn't do that automatically. So just remember to do that. And again, this stands for YAML, which I would be lying if I said I knew the intricacies of YAML and where it came from. I don't. But Docassemble uses YAML to code interviews, which is a lot like Markdown, if you've ever used that. And as you get more familiar with it, you'll see how easy it is to use. And it makes a lot of sense just to read, which is really, really nice when you're coding these interviews. So our goal right now is to have our Docassemble interview just say, hello world. So the first thing that we're going to do is use a question. And the question is the main kind of block that Docassemble uses to run through logic, to display things, to ask questions, and everything like that. So we're going to just say, and if you're familiar with Python or other programming languages, You'll remember things like return or print, that display things on the console, and that's our goal here, to kind of mirror that functionality. So now that we have our question, hello world, and you'll note that we don't have to put it in quotes. Once we say question with our colon there, we can just, type words and they'll show up. So let's save that, see if we get any errors. No big red flashing alarms. So let's see what happens when we do save and run. Uh-oh, we do get an error. So this is what happens when you mess something up with docassemble, is it throws an error screen and gives you a message. Docassemble is finished executing all code blocks, marked as initial or mandatory fini. Okay, so if anybody's familiar with reading error messages, you'll understand what's going on here. But for people that aren't familiar with reading error messages are super helpful. And believe me, if you start using docassemble or any other programming languages, you have to get very used to reading error messages, because they show up, at least for me, a lot. So we kind of need to parse out what this is saying, because it's telling us what the problem is and what we messed up. So it says docassemble is finished executing all code blocks marked as initial or mandatory. So that tells us something, that this term mandatory here has something to do with the interview and that it's important. So does anybody have any ideas what could be going wrong here with our hello world attempt?
And feel free to unmute yourself now if you.
Yeah.
Either one. Okay, so I have a couple of suggestions. One is we're missing the 3 dashes. Another is there isn't a question. And I see from Michael, we didn't mark it as mandatory. Michael, you want to explain? I mean, if you want to unmute yourself and share that with us a little bit.
Yeah, so as I understand it, we would have, there's a special block that you're supposed to have to tell docassemble to ask a question. And so we didn't mark our hello world as mandatory to be asked.
Exactly. So let's go back to our playground. And this is where docassemble is different from other programming languages like Python, where Python kind of does what you tell it to. If you type in, print in a console, let's see if I can bring one up here. So this is the console on my computer, and this is just for a quick comparison. If I tell Python to print hello world, it'll print hello world without any kind of like pushback or throwing an error. Docassemble's a little bit smarter than Python, and don't tell Python I said that, but it is. Docassemble uses different modifiers and different logical decisions to decide what to do. So you can't just say, hey, here's a question, hello world, without telling it what to do with that. And the way docassemble looks for things is initially looking for the mandatory block. That. So we tell docassemble, hey, this is mandatory. Mandatory is equal to true. So now, what do you think happens when we hit save and run once we put that in there? Let's find out. Okay, so we didn't throw an error. And we've returned hello world. So in that lesson, we figured out, and you'll see, do you remember on the right-hand side here, when we didn't have mandatory, right? We had kind of a yellow warning message. This interview file does not have an endpoint. If you intend to run it directly, you need to add a mandatory code block or question. So we have a question, but we needed that mandatory code block. And you see when we save it, once we put in mandatory, that warning message goes away and it's able to display hello world.
So just want to pause here for a moment and just acknowledge everybody's, this is you've created fire moment. It's kind of exciting. You've written your first docassemble interview. And some of you may not have yet, which is also okay. We can learn a lot from when things aren't working. I see Elizabeth here had a question. She was saying that there was some problems with the console accepting colon. Elizabeth, are you okay with us sharing your screen for a minute so we can see if we can resolve that? It's helpful for us to take a couple of times to do that to see if we can get people. Okay, so you'll have to share your screen. And I think to do that, Sam will have to stop sharing for just a second.
Yeah. Hold on just a moment. Okay. So I should have stopped sharing.
So Elizabeth, you'll see there's a big green share screen button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you want to click that, then we'll be able to see what you're seeing. Oh, let me try that again. So you should be able to share now. There we go. Great. Okay, so it looks like you're literally just having some trouble typing the colon key. That's interesting. It could end up being everything looks good except for the missing colon. So
yeah, it could be.
So you're able to type it somewhere else, but not interesting. You can't type it inside that console. You want to try again?
It's really odd.
Hard for us to troubleshoot that, but just give it a try. Let's see what happens. You got it in the search bar. That's very weird. Oh, you get a semicolon, but not a regular one. Huh. Everything, other kinds of keys you can type there. That is very weird. I've never seen this before. But yeah, Tim has made a really good point. You can copy and paste it for now. And I might suggest like opening a new private browser window and see if it's like something to do with just this browser and log in from somewhere else. Good question from Mandy is, do we use the question block even when we're not asking a question and just displaying text like hello world? The answer is it needs a place for it to go. It needs to know like what function it's serving in the screen, but we'll see some other ways that we put text on the screen besides just clicking that using the question keyword. All right. Let's go back to Sam.
Yeah. So I was having trouble with my monitor there. So let me share my screen again. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the concept of variables. Now that we've gotten our initial interview to, work and tell us something, we want to have it do more than that. To really be able to gather things and ask questions and set variables. So is everybody, or is anybody not familiar with the concept of, what variables are in the world of programming? Does anybody have any questions about that? We kind of cover it as we go. So let's take our Hello World interview and modify it a little bit. So the way that we separate out question blocks, different blocks of things that we want docassemble to do, is with 3 hyphens. So anytime you want to separate something out, just put 3 questions between it. It's always important to put in your hyphens between questions, so that docassemble knows, hey, these are separate things. And that's just a way of delineating, what's what. So let's put in another question. What is your name? And here we're going to specify a field. Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here. You'll see that this is a lot different, or not a lot, but kind of different than this question up here, right? Instead of just saying hello world, we're having it say what is your name, but we have this specifier down below it as well. Fields is, telling docassemble, hey, here's the thing you need to look for. Ask them this thing and have them put it in. So we have the label here as name. Labels always come on the left, separated by a colon. Then we have this, username. And username is our variable. This is like, if you remember algebra, or math. I was terrible at math. But if you remember math, right? You have like an X or a Y, and you solve for X. So we've named our variable here username. And right now username is empty. It doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of there. And it doesn't have anything that, it does. So what do we think happens when we hit save and run on this interview? Is docassemble going to look for username? So let's see what happens. Okay, so it just still says hello world, right? So docassemble isn't asking us for username right now. It's just kind of there. And if we did source and show variables, and this is a little bit advanced, but I think it helps with the concept. This is all the variables that docassemble is looking for. And you won't find username here. It's not there. Docassemble's not even looking for it. So we have to tell docassemble, hey, I want you to look for username and I want you to ask them the question. So if we do this, if we give docassemble something to look for, then we'll see if it asks for username. So, and feel free to chime in with any questions, because this is a little bit, there's a couple of concepts going on here. So you see that we have our variable username and we have our mandatory code block. And this little guy right here, the $ with the curly brace, whatever that's called, the squiggly brace, is telling docassemble, hey, insert this variable, whatever this variable is, if it's 5, if it's, you know, hello, whatever it is, put it in here. And we have our mandatory code block is equal to true. So docassemble has to show this, and that means it has to look for this username variable. So let's see what happens when we hit save and run. Oh, so now it's asking us a question. What is your name? So we'll put in our name and hit continue. And then it says, hello, Sam. So I'm going to stop here. I think there's some questions in the chat. And we can kind of go over this more in depth. So let me figure out how to get to Zoom on my computer.
If you want, I can read them, Sam. I've been kind of answering some of them on the way, but I'm sure other people have similar questions. Yeah. So a couple of great questions. Like one is the spacing that we use important? The answer is no. You can use whatever spacing you like, but you do need to be consistent. If you just use the tab to handle spacing for you, then it will stay consistent. And generally people use one level of indentation for each marker that they need to indent for. But if you wanted to use like 1 space or 3 spaces or 4 spaces, you could, and it would work, but you have to keep it consistent. Mm-hmm. Another question is, does the order of the mandatory keyword and the other keywords within each block matter? No, it does not. You could have mandatory at the top or at the bottom, and it would still work. Mm-hmm. Do we need spaces inside those special tags, the $ and the curly brackets? No, but it's good for readability. And Amani has a really great point that the label question is a little bit misleading. I think the answer is yes, it is. I think that was probably something Jonathan did and kept the same for backwards compatibility when he added other features to it. So yes, considering it to be like the page header is good. That's a good way to think of it. It's like the big bold text that appears at the top of each screen. Let's see. I'm seeing some other really good questions. Does the order of questions matter? No. There is a list of standard variables. I think I probably won't go into that too much quite yet. How does it ask for the questions first and then show the hello afterwards? You want to take that one, Sam? Explain like why, or maybe somebody else who's used docassemble a little bit or has a guess. Why, when Sam ran this interview, did it ask for the username, even though the username question was at the bottom? And how did it know to ask for that?
I can take that, Quinten. So docassemble is pretty amazing in that it is able to order the interview in the correct order to answer the questions. So it sees that, okay, we need a value for username. And so it's going to ask that first before it outputs the end result.
Okay, that's a great question, great answer. And I think Liana, you said something really similar on the Slack, on the chat, that is. Think of it as like a dependency satisfaction thing. It's going through and figuring out everything it needs in order to give us the answer that we have mandatory at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. For commenting, yes, comments are great. So maybe Sam, you can show us a couple of different ways to do commenting inside your code block.
Yeah. So
2 main ways you can do it.
Yeah. So if we wanted to add in a comment, this is my preferred method. Here is a comment. And we can save that. And you notice just the hash or what is it? What is this thing called? An octothorpe sometimes? I call it a hash mark. But if we put that in as a comment, you'll see it doesn't show up. on our actual screen. So that's just showing up in the console or in the editing section. I honestly right now can't remember what the second way to do it is. Is it 3 quotation marks, Quinten?
Oh,
Because I
that's
never
like
use
a
it.
Python block. You could do that. I just meant
Yeah.
like the comment specifier is what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So
And then
it's bad that I never use that. But yeah, you can do that as well.
and one nice thing about the comment specifier is you can make a multi-line comment by just using that line continuation mark. Don't forget.
So if you do, and this is another cool editing concept, is this up and down line, whatever that's called. On my keyboard, it's above enter if you hit shift. But this lets you write multi-line like paragraphs in, and docassemble reads it as if it's like one big block. So let's say we wanted, you know, that's kind of unreadable. It's not very pretty. So the better way to do that is to put in the line and then tab that over so that it's all one block. And you can use multiple lines if you want to. And docassemble will read it all as one thing, which is nice. Pipe. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
I don't know what things are called sometimes. So
Tim had a good question, which is, sorry to interrupt, but can you put in inline comments? You can. Sometimes it's harder to read, but it depends on the context. It may not do what you want. So like in the end of line 8, for example, if Sam put an octothorpe hashtag #, then you can put a comment right there.
Yeah, but you can't, just keep in mind, you can't put in comments in your question block.
In the part that's text, because docassemble has a whole different meaning there.
Right. So docassemble uses Markdown to format text. So you see here in the example blocks, like if you put a hash and then, you know, text after it inside something that docassemble knows it's supposed to read as text, then it'll show up as a heading. So it's a really nice way to format your questions with, you know, H1, H2, H3 text or paragraph text and things like that. But just keep that in mind if you're putting in comments as well. So I see a couple more questions about question order and things like that. And I wanted to go over that a little bit more in depth. So Michael, that was an awesome answer, and I want to explore that just a little bit. So docassemble is always looking for the mandatory code block, right, to decide what to do and what variables to set. So if we put our mandatory code block down here at the bottom under our what is your name question and hit save and run, we'll get our question. But then if we hit continue, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't tell us hello, because that's the only question block that it's looking at. So one solution to that is to put mandatory code blocks on every question that you want asked or everything that you want displayed. And if you do this, docassemble is going to go kind of question by question straight down the interview file and look at every question and ask them in the order that they're in the interview file. And it's kind of an inelegant way to make docassemble do what you need it to do, especially if you're coding interviews with any kind of logic in them. For example, if you have an interview that asked, you know, what state do you live in? And then if they put in, I live in New York, then it would ask them a series of follow-up questions. If you try to do that with mandatory code blocks, that could get very gnarly very fast. And there are better ways to do that, and we'll look at that later in the sessions. But the best practice really is to just have one and maybe at most two mandatory code blocks and have docassemble run through the mandatory code block and then decide what to do and what questions to ask and structure your logic that way. So that's how docassemble does it, you know, looking for question order and things like that. So any other questions on variables?
I have a question, Sam.
Yes.
So as far as the white space goes, when do you use just a single space versus a tab?
So good question. I believe the tab in docassemble defaults to 2 spaces. So I'm a really bad Python programmer in that I use tabs and not spaces, just out of habit. You know, it doesn't. I think it doesn't matter all that much if you want to use 2 spaces or a tab. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Like after mandatory and the colon, that would be a single space. And then if you go down to the next line, then I think quote unquote proper YAML formatting would be 2 spaces, you know, like you said. So.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Michael. So yeah, so for people who've used HTML before, you can think of the tabs as being kind of the beginning and end of a HTML tag. They're like marking off a section of the code. So everything that is at the same indentation level is part of the same tag until a new tag starts. And you can have a bigger and closing tag as well. This might end up being confusing to some people, but let's Sam, if you want to add a couple more fields, maybe I can annotate.
Yeah.
That works. So yeah, this is perfect. Okay, so this whole section here that I've highlighted is all at the same indentation level. See how those line up? That column on the left here. And therefore, it's all part of the same area of code in this question block. Here we have the question, we have fields. Those are part of the same level of the question block as well. The text here is indented. This happens to be 1 line. You saw already how Sam did it with 2 lines. That's its own area of text that is part of 1 tag. This is all part of the same tag. So that space there is really just like punctuation. It's not doing the same thing as starting a new tag. But you need the space so it knows. I'm not sure a good way to explain it, but You need some space there just to separate it. Otherwise, it
Yeah.
doesn't know that you've finished the specifier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not doing quite the same thing as the tabs did here, but you could use as many spaces as you want, or a tab, as long as you do at least one after the colon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the most important thing is, you know, that when you use tabs or spaces that you do it consistently, you know, so that it's readable, and that if somebody else comes along to edit your code, that, you know, it makes sense. So that's really the most important thing, aside from, you know, like making sure you know, have it in the correct formatting to not throw an error. So since I've added, you know, these extra fields in here with labels and variables, let's see what happens when I run it. So it asks us those questions, but it doesn't display those variables, right? So we have those fields as defined, but they don't show up on our end screen because we're not telling docassemble to show those. So if we separated this out into a new question block, you all think that docassemble would ask this question like it did before? And Amani, yeah, exactly. Why favorite cookie and favorite color are being asked, even though they aren't necessary for a mandatory page. So if we hit save and run here, now that I've separated out these things into separate questions, right? So it asks us, what is your name? If we hit continue, it just says, hello, Sam. It doesn't ask us about favorite cookie or favorite color. So the only reason it was asking us favorite cookie and favorite color before is it was part of this question block that contained this variable, which is what docassemble was looking for to do its job, right? Which is to complete the mandatory code block. But as soon as I separated it out into a follow-up question that doesn't have anything to do with this one, and none of these variables are used here, then it doesn't ask this question. It just passes over it. So Amani, does that answer your question? That's a great question. So if we wanted to have docassemble ask this question, we'd need to specify the variable that we want it to look for. So if we put in favorite cookie up here as something it needed to display, then it would ask this question as well. It would also ask favorite color because it's kind of forced to go along with whatever the fields are. As long as there's one variable in the question block that it's looking for, it'll put in the other fields as well. So one little thing I love about docassemble is the variables window here. You see we have favorite color and favorite cookie, and they're yellow, right? So that means they're not really being used. They're there as variables, but they're not being used by anything. And you see username is down here, and it's blue, which means it's being asked, and docassemble is also using this as a variable. So if we put in favorite cookie here, And we can just click on this variable in our variables window, which is one of my favorite secret features of docassemble, and hit save. You'll see that favorite cookie turned blue. So docassemble is looking for completeness. It's looking for, is this variable kind of out there in the ether in the YAML file? And then is the variable actually being used? Is docassemble actually looking for favorite cookie and doing something with it? Or is it just kind of floating around like favorite color and not being used for anything? So now if we hit save and run, it'll ask us what's your name, and then ask us the follow-up question as well. So now it's dealing with those two variables, and it asked us favorite cookie, and favorite color is just kind of tagging along, even though it's not doing anything. So does anybody have any more questions before we move on?
This is Amani. I'm wondering, in my variables pane, there's some variables that show up blue that I'm not using. I'm guessing there are some just kind of built in, like advocate, case, client, court.
Mm-hmm.
Does it matter that they're blue? That kind of, as you explained, that means they're asked and used. Is there any like cleanup I don't see it in
So are you
yours.
looking at the test interview?
Mine may have started from a test interview, yeah.
Yeah.
So mine,
So
where it says variables,
Yeah.
comma, etc. Actually, I can annotate so I don't have to describe. Right here.
Got it.
Even if you have a different window showing in your playground, if those don't have to necessarily match. So if
Okay.
that is different, then you could be looking in a different file to get the variable list.
That makes sense. Okay, thanks.
yeah. So, and that has to do with this guy right here, the include. So, and this is a little bit more advanced concept, but you can have docassemble build an interview from multiple YAML files. And it will go and look at the variables in all of those YAML files and see whether or not they're complete or not, if they kind of make that full circuit. So that's, I think advocate is coming from this basic questions .yaml file that's under this include block.
Great. Thanks for that explanation.
So Giovanni, yeah, you can only put one variable between these specifiers. And this is just like a way of telling docassemble, hey, display this variable. If you wanted to do, you know, like first name, middle name, last name, whatever that thing is that comes at the end of names, like junior, senior, you know, you would need to separate those out. You couldn't do, you know, something like that. You need to separate out each variable with the curly braces and the $sign. So Barbara, is there a maximum number of fields permitted per question? I don't actually know the answer to that. Oh, thanks, Quinten. There is no maximum number of fields, but if we did, you know, like 50 fields, then when we, you know, went to the question, you'd have the user just scrolling down for a long time to get to the continue button. So you just have to keep stuff like that in mind, and the way that you structure your questions so that they're easy to read and easy to see. There's a couple of schools of thought on this. One is, you know, you try to ask only one or two, ask the user to put in one or two variables per screen, or you group things logically. Like if you have an address block, you'd put in, street, city, state, country, territory, province, something like that, zip code or postal code, all in the same screen, instead of asking those in separate blocks.
So let's see. So one thing I want to say is I realized there actually is a limit. It's from YAML, but I think it's 1024. So hopefully you never have a
Don't
question.
do that. Don't do that.
Let me see. Okay, so one question I think might be a good teaching moment. LaDeirdre, if you don't mind sharing your screen, and we could see if we can solve the syntax problem you ran into. Because I think other people might have the same thing, but if you're brave enough to share, we'd love to solve it. It might help other people too. To do that, Sam, I think we'll have to stop sharing.
There we go. Better?
Okay, yeah, I don't mind sharing just a second. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Don't mind my little Word document with my notes.
That's good. Well, let's start by saving and running and see what we get in the error message. That's always a good thing to try. Okay. So what we're getting here is something you'll run into problems like this. And it's good to catch and see what's going on. So the first thing we do is we look at the top and see it says error reading YAML file. So that tells us the problem is in a lower level than docassemble running into like a variable it couldn't find. It's like the actual format of the file isn't quite right. And then if we look down at the bottom, it says error was scanner error. Again, that's a really good clue that you'll see those errors sometimes, and it means there's something off about the YAML format. So the YAML is like the 3 dashes, indentation, things like that, that can cause that type of error.
Okay.
Look at your playground, and I wonder if there are
wait, is it this?
You got it already. Yeah, let's try saving and running again and see what happens.
Oh, got it. Oh, so small.
Yeah, that's a problem you'll have happen again and again, probably. It's really easy to
Okay, yeah, totally. Okay, well, thank you. That was super
Thanks
helpful.
for sharing.
Yeah. All right.
So let's see. Just so everyone knows, we are planning to take a break, trying to just gauge how long a break it should be. But hopefully, I think, Sam, I'm just talking to you and to everybody at the same time, but I'm thinking maybe we should go and do the logic section a little bit, let people work on that during the break if they want to, and skip style stuff. So we can docx files after the break.
Yeah. So you want to start on logic now?
I think so.
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Are you ready to do some?
You want me to take that over?
Logic? I'm happy to do it, or if you want to do it. We had a couple of 2 last questions. Elizabeth, why the spacing of the variables within the brackets? So within the brackets, you don't necessarily need to have spaces there. That works just as well. But I like to have spaces just for readability, so that I, when I'm reading things quickly, I can, see what the variable is a little bit better. But ultimately, that's up to you, whether or not you want to put spaces in there. And then Barbara, who writes the error messages, can they be edited? I don't know. I'm sure if you, so one of the great things about docassemble is you can, basically build your own version of docassemble by downloading the source code from GitHub, and you can go in and edit some of the error messages that way. I wouldn't recommend it, especially starting out. I don't think I've ever run it completely from scratch with modifications. I think I tried and it basically burned down and fell over. And I think Quinten's putting in an answer as well. You know, some of the error messages are system specific, like there's some from Python, there's some from Jinja, there's some from Flask, which is the framework that it uses to run. So those can't really be edited as well. Okay, so let's move on to logic. Quinten, you want to take over with logic?
Yeah, I'm happy to, if that's
okay.
Let me just go ahead and get things ready. So
right, let me
have that on its own screen. So again, you could read along with us while we do that. And let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see. All right, so this is where you all can be if you want to read along with the notes, and there's some helpful snippets for you to take in as well. So hold on, let me get the chat window so I can get that link to everybody. Where did that go?
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, you did already. Okay, I won't worry about it. Oh, I see. It was hidden behind for me. All right, so let's go ahead and just explore this first code sample here. So if you want to copy it, you can click the little copy button there in the top right. Paste it inside your playground. Let's just save and run and see what it does. All right, so what is your name? I'm going to put in my name. Quinten, and no message to report. So let's take a look at the code and see if we can learn any more about what this does. Oh, wait, here's something on line 12. We have this secret message. So anybody have a guess as to what is going on with that secret message variable? Feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat, whatever is more comfortable for you. Well, let's try it. Let's try. Okay, so I do see a message in the chat. If your name is Scotty, a secret message comes up, perhaps, from Brian. And then Mirabella says, if you name the right name, maybe it displays. Okay. So let's try Scotty. So if we use the name Scotty, it prints on the screen, hello, Scotty, which that was similar to when I typed my own name. It also says, beam me up, Scotty. So what's going on here exactly? We have a different type. We never actually typed in anything that said secret message, right? The words we typed didn't appear in a window that we could actually interact with ourselves. What's going on here is that we have a new type of block. It's called the code block. And inside a code block, we can create variables that the user doesn't have to type in themselves. That lets you do, obviously, a lot of really powerful things. Like we could get information from a database. We could get information from an API that lives on someone else's server on the internet. Or we could construct things like do math, run functions on them to change the words that people type in, and do all kinds of really complicated things. So here we're doing something pretty simple. We're just giving like a little special message to Star Trek fans. And this is one of the basic building blocks of Python code and creating kind of more responsive interviews, and it's called the if block, the if statement, as I see, who was that on the chat? Someone had already said that. And I'm doing the full screen share, here we go. Let's see. Yes, Mirabella, you want to just tell us a little bit about like what if then means?
Hi. Just quickly, it's just from high school, actually, learned a while ago, like if a condition is met, then a result is displayed. The logic of if then, just simply high school logic for me.
Great, yeah, I mean, that's a great callback. So yeah, if you have done any kind of logic before, this is gonna look familiar to you. If you programmed, obviously it will be familiar because it's one of the most first things you learn in programming is if something happens, then you do something. So let's parse what this is doing. So you notice that the main keyword we start with is just literally the word if, relatively plain English way that we can read it. So if we read across, if user underscore name, then we have this new thing, double equal sign. And then we have the word Scotty in quotes. So those are all important things to parse out. So what do we have here? After if, we have some kind of expression. This just happens to be a variable name, so nothing fancy. Then we have the double equal sign. And then we have the word Scotty. So what we are doing here, anyone tell me what we're doing in this part that I've highlighted? What are we trying to do? Between the variable username and then the word Scotty in quotes. What are we doing exactly?
Capturing the value of username and specifically looking for Scotty.
Yeah, so specifically looking for Scotty. So like one way I might phrase that is to say we're doing a comparison. And when we're comparing the value of something, we use a lot of operators, but one that you're going to use a lot is the equality test, which is 2 equal signs in a row. So we're saying, is the username equal to the value of the word Scotty? On the next line, you can see here we have a new variable that we've created that lives completely in the Python code. We didn't have it on the right-hand side of a question block in the field statement. And we're using the equal sign a different way. So anyone tell me what they think this is doing right here, this line 5 of our code? What's happening to the value secret message, the variable secret message here, after we run line 5?
So we are assigning a new message to that variable.
Exactly.
So it's, yeah.
Sudhakar, is that right? Am I saying that right? No, probably not. Oh, okay, good. All right, so yes, so we're assigning a value here. So one way we could assign a value is by asking the user a question. Here we're assigning it with code. And notice we still use the equal sign, but it has a different appearance. We're only using 1. Let me just show you something interesting that you might run into. If we get rid of that first equal sign on line 4 and we only have 1, let's see the error message that we'll get. This is actually a super helpful error message. If anyone has used another programming language like C, or I think perhaps JavaScript works this way as well, which I think more people are using nowadays, you wouldn't get a helpful error message like this. It would just silently do the thing you didn't want it to do. Anyone have a guess for what this means? I mean, you can kind of see what we changed. So here we're trying to use the assignment version of the equal sign inside a test. Python is smart enough to know that probably is not what we mean. Other programming languages will just fail silently, but in Python, it will give us this warning message. So our code won't silently do something we don't want it to do. Like one thing that would happen if we were using a different language like C is that it would actually assign the value to username. The word Scotty would be assigned to the value of username, no matter what the person had typed below. And then that would be tested to see, did that work? Were we able to assign the value? Yeah, of course we could. So it would be a really meaningless test for us. Luckily, Python rescues us from that kind of mistake. And it's pretty easy when you're first getting started to forget when to use a double equal sign and when to use a single. This error message is the error message you'll get that helps catch you from that mistake. Okay. Along with the if statement, we have the else statement here. And then we have another option here. So what does that mean, do we think is going on? So we have if the username is equal to Scotty, the secret message becomes beam me up, Scotty. What's going on in lines 6 and 7?
So if the person does not write Scotty, it will appear no message to report, right?
Exactly, Santiago has got it. So if we say something other than Scotty, that's what we'll display. So that's the keyword else. So it's like basically a catch-all. It handles all the other situations that we weren't handling. We do have the ability to add some more conditions if we want, some other things we want to check. So someone give me a name that might be kind of interesting to put in here. Who else might we want to give us a secret message to?
But wait, before we do the name, why do you write if instead of else?
Great question. Anybody have a guess for why we wouldn't write else here?
That's short for else if. And else is, if you just write else, that's like the default if all other conditions fail. But the elif or the else if means, okay, we're going to consider something else.
The alternative.
Yeah, it's an alternative. So in some other
Okay, thank
languages,
you.
there are like some other shortcuts. In Python, there's not. This is the way we always handle like multiple possibilities. We use that else if keyword, which I don't know why. Python's really good about readability, but this is one they shortened in a way that I don't find really helpful to read. We can't write else if. That's what you could do in lots of languages. I'll let someone else give me. Be really great syntax. Actually, I'm not really sure why they don't let you do that, but they don't in Python. We have to shorten it to this else if, E-L-I-F. Okay, so this is the way we can handle other types of conditions, other possible things that we want to test it against. And does anybody have another message they want me to put in here, by the way, or anything interesting that they've put in?
Amani, you want to put in Spock?
All right. And then
Put in Spock.
here, live long and prosper.
Yeah. Thanks, Amani.
Let's try doing that save and run again. So great, that did just what we wanted. Anybody have a prediction for what will happen if I write this? Oh, this actually is fine. What's your prediction for what will happen if I do this? What message will I see?
The last one.
And why do you
No
think that?
message
Yeah, why do you think that's going to happen, Sudhakar?
because it's all caps and we are using the camel case.
Correct. Yeah, so that's something to be aware of. Python is picky about things like case. So the word Scotty is different from the word Scotty, all uppercase. There are ways to handle that. For example, if it's a snippet of text, which in programming we usually call a string, there are methods we can use to compare them that make them identical in intermediate steps. So we could do something like this. This is a little bit advanced, but what we're doing is we're calling a function that's part of the string, and we're making it lowercase, and then we're comparing that to a lowercase version of the word. We don't actually need the second one. That was a mistake there. So we can do a case-insensitive comparison that way. There's no other shortcut to it. You basically have to change the string to be lowercase that you didn't control and compare it to a lowercase one that you did control. So now if I type Scotty, I get the same message that I wanted. I could do all lowercase, or have a Y at the end there. So notice we didn't change the actual value of that user input. We just changed it for the temporary comparison that we did here. So we're comparing to the lowercase version. We're not changing the original. This is, I think, these are the, once you have these two concepts that you can get user input and you can change it with code, that is the most powerful features of a docassemble interview. So you'll be able to do a lot of things on your own at this point. I want to take you to a couple of other ways that we can manipulate this, but I think this might be a really good place for us to take a break. While we're taking, let's say, a 15-minute break, we come back at 10:40. Why don't you play around with the rest of the exercise on that page, see if you can add a couple of other conditional options and add your own secret messages. I'm going to pause the recording. Sam, maybe you can remind me to restart it when we come back, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. And
then Quinten, I can stay on if people have questions.
Yeah,
so I'll stay on if people want to ask questions, you know, like screen share what they're doing. You know, so if anybody wants to do that, I'll hang out. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, what do you think? Should we do the screen recording still, or?
No, we can turn it off for the break.
Yeah, so this is your chance to ask a question without it being
unrecorded.
Unrecorded, unfiltered.
Can ask anything.
Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording then. And we'll see everybody in 15 minutes. Yeah, so that's a really great question, Mirabella. And then maybe, Sam, you want to show us the other way by writing out the or instead of using the list?
Yeah. So I don't like using or statements in Python, just because they get clunky.
So David asked a question, should we be learning basic Python? I don't think you need to learn basic Python, but you will end up learning it in context. So I don't think you have to start at the Python end, but it's good to know that when you're trying to do stuff, where you need to look. And the answer is often going to be in Python. So this code block, everything inside a code block is Python. And to Junio's question, can you import NumPy or pandas in the code section? Yes, if those are really popular Python libraries, and yes, you can do that. There are other ways to do, oh, Jonathan's back. I was going to say that, Jonathan, but yes, absolutely right. You should put that in a module file. The problem with doing imports right in the code block here is that sometimes you run into problems with the way docassemble saves interview variables from screen to screen. So you are best off to do imports in a separate Python file. That's not a topic we can talk about too much today. But what I say is that code blocks, keep those for basic things like to R's question. I'm sorry, R, I don't see what your name is, just the R. You can do operations inside a code block like plus equals 1. Wouldn't really work for a string, but other kinds of operations you can do inside a code block. Maybe that's actually a good sample for me to jump off to. So I'm going to just take over sharing.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Need me to stop sharing?
No, I don't actually. Let's see. Let's try doing that. So first of all, it's important to know you can have more than one code block. So if you're thinking like in a Python program, you might have one big code block. You shouldn't really use that model, and Jonathan talked a lot about this yesterday. It's good to think of like each variable that you want to set or work with kind of gets its own code block. Group the related things together, but don't try to do everything in one big one. So let's try adding a value to the username. This is what that looks like in Python. Anybody have a prediction about what will happen if I click save and run right now? What will happen when we get to the screen where it says hello username? Okay, I see a message in the Slack. It's a different question. Let's just try it and run and see what happens and see if anyone. Okay, so Brian says it's going to add Esquire after. Let's see if that happens. So it does not add Esquire. Let's take a look at our code again and see if we can figure out why that happened. Any guesses? So first, let's just break down what happened. So I think what we know is that this code block right here didn't end up running. Anybody have a guess as to why it didn't run? We're not asking docassemble to print. I think that is very related to it. Yeah, so one way we knew that we would get something to be on the screen and to be run or requested is by printing it on the screen. But what it really came down to was that we didn't have it in a mandatory block anywhere. It wasn't being required. And one way to make it required is to print it on the screen. We can use mandatory on a code block as well. So one way to get it to run would be to change our interview to look just like this. Let's do a save and run and see what happens. So a couple of interesting things here. So yes, it did change the name to Scotty Esquire. We're getting the message, no message to report now. So this is one way to make code run. Just like a question block, it needs to be either mandatory or referenced by a mandatory block. Let's try putting it here. See what happens. Any predictions if that moving the question down here to the bottom will do anything to change our interview? let's see what happens and see if we can break down why that happened. Any guesses? So it did change the interview. We no longer get the Esquire added to the name. Anyone guess maybe a reason why that could have happened? Well, let's try to think through the way that docassemble is running our interview. And it's a little unfair because you're all just starting out, but this is a good thing to keep in mind and we won't go into it too deep. So David is saying it reads in order from top to bottom. And R is saying because the condition is met by the first code block, so it didn't need to run the second code block. And those are both getting at exactly the right important thing to remember. So first of all, it reads from top to bottom. Yes, that's exactly right when it comes to deciding which block to run as the mandatory block. So we get down to our mandatory true. The first one we run into is on line 15. And it needs to display everything on this screen. And as R says, hello underscore user underscore name, the first way that gets satisfied is by just showing the name itself. And then it's done. It doesn't have to do any more chasing of other variables or screens. Then we get to that hello Scotty screen. There's no way to continue. So there's no more code that will run. This is an ending screen. So even though we have a mandatory block in our interview, because it happens after the other mandatory block is already satisfied and there's no way to continue, this code down here never gets run because the mandatory block evaluation happens top to bottom. That might be something that you remember. So Tim asked, is it evaluated and not printed? And the answer is, it gets considered potentially, but Jonathan can answer that better, but it never needs to run it. So it tries to run. It's like, okay, it's in the queue to run next, but we never can get next. So it never actually gets to do anything. Sam already hinted at this. Because this can get really confusing when you do this kind of thing where you have two mandatory blocks, which one's going to be evaluated. And it especially is hard for someone else to understand your code if you come back in later and make changes. You might not remember what it's supposed to do if you have a bunch of mandatory blocks sprinkled throughout your code. I like to handle that by having a single code block at the top of the interview and have everything that is mandatory be triggered inside a single code block. This is still Python, but one thing that is kind of special about Python inside the docassemble context is just mentioning the variable will mean that docassemble has to try to find the definition of that variable. So for example, we want to ask for the user's name as the first thing. Then we want to calculate the secret message. And then we want to do two more things. We want to show, and I'm just going to put a comment in here as a placeholder. First, we want to show that that screen where we give the results. So like a placeholder, so what we want to do exactly. We want to display the message, right? Oh, but really before we display the message, add Esquire to the name. So how do we do that? I'm going to take out this second mandatory true and this third one here and run it. And let's see what happens exactly. I think at this point, you all kind of have a guess. We're going to get those screens we mentioned because those are part of a mandatory code block. We're going to calculate the value of secret message. But that happens in the background. There's nothing for docassemble to show. So we get to this error message that says there's nothing left to display. So we need a way to give both of those, the screen that's shown to the user and this code block, some kind of variable to hang their hat on, essentially. Inside a code block, we want to reference some other variable that we can make up whatever we want. It's going to be just used for internal flow control. It's not going to be something that we ever have to show to the user. So we can make it whatever we like and still be able to reference it inside our interview. Sorry if you're hearing my son crying in the background there. He is okay, I promise. So let's give this to a value that's descriptive, something like add Esquire to name. It's a little long, but at this point, being descriptive is better than being concise. I want to give it some value so that there's a value that it can say, okay, yeah, I found the value of that, but it can be anything I like. I like to set it to true. Now when docassemble tries to find the definition of add Esquire to name, it has to run this code block to do that. Remember how when we asked a question and there are other fields on the same screen, those fields get displayed too? This is kind of the same concept. All of the variables inside this code block are going to run until it gets to the variable that docassemble needs to find. It's kind of like the same concept as having two fields on the same screen. Finally, we need to give some kind of variable name to this display screen. I like to give these ending screens an event tag. Event is a new specifier. I should try to be consistent about the vocabulary here. And this basically says I'm going to give this screen its own variable. And I'm going to call this ending screen. That's a really common variable that I use when there's only one ending screen inside my code. Now when I run it, let's see the sequence of things that happen. So one question is, first, do we think that we're going to get the secret message displayed if I put Scotty in? One thing to think about. One is, will we get to this error again that we have where there's no more blocks to show? And finally, is Esquire going to be added to the name when we see that ending screen? So see if you can make your own prediction. I'm going to do a save and run, and we'll see what happens. And I know this is a point where it's really easy for people to have missed some code when we were typing so quickly. So I'm going to just paste that into the chat. So if you have a syntax error, you could copy and paste our current progress just to follow along. Okay, so what is your name? Let's say Scotty. Great, so we got to an ending screen. There's no errors there. It's showing hello Scotty Esquire, and it's showing our secret message, which only checks for the word Scotty. I'm going to pick up on one of the questions that might have happened. Again, someone might have brought it up during the break a second time. But to get to that list of variables, so we can kind of inspect the state of docassemble's interview, we can click the source button. You can hide that in your production interviews, but it will always show when you run an interview from the playground. Then we click show variables and values. And we can kind of browse through the state of our interview in progress. So one question that I have is, what is the username value set to, right? How did it display that message for us? Even though it is no longer equal to exactly Scotty, it says Scotty, Esquire. And that is the value I can see here. By the way, this view here is one that you get by default in Firefox. So besides privacy reasons, Firefox is a great browser to use when you're working in docassemble, just because it has this native JSON display, which is really kind of helpful. You can also see some of our intermediate variables that we set, like add Esquire to name, that's set to true. And by the way, we don't see a variable for ending screen, because this display is basically what happened exactly before we got to this screen. So it won't show things that are done on the screen itself. Let's just understand what happened a little bit. And I know this might be details for some of you that are a little complex. But if we just read through and follow the message in order in our code block, first we had our username value was created, then we had our secret message was created. This is already done before we ever add Esquire to the name. So this code block has run, it's done, it's not going to be evaluated anymore. And it's set to the correct value. Then on line 7, we do the add Esquire to name step. So the username value is changed after secret message has already been created. And that is a permanent change that it's done. So there was a really early question on about whether this is declarative programming. And this is an example of how you get something that is really close to it. Like, we do a bunch of things in an order that I control. Some things may still happen in an unexpected way. So let's see what happens if we commented out username. Any predictions for whether our code will still work based on your past experiences? So let's go ahead and run that and see. It still asks for the username because that's needed by that block that we just ran. So in order for us to get to the secret message, we have to get the username. Let's see if I added username twice. Will we see the username screen twice? We'll kind of stop here. No, we didn't. Because what we're doing here is not exactly the same thing as saying display this screen to the user. We're saying make sure that there's a value for this screen that is something that you can interact with to get to the next step. Username is already defined. So when we ask for the username here, there's nothing for it to do, and it won't show that screen 2 times. If you need that behavior, there are ways around that, but we won't get into those right now. I see a couple of messages on the chat talking about people wanting to make sure we get to working with documents, which is great. I think we have a good amount of time to do that. But this concept here, I think, of using the mandatory code block at the top to control your question order is one that's really helpful to get early on so that you can really understand what's happening in your interview without having to scroll around and find different parts of it and try to trace the logic in your head. It's one that can really help save you time and struggle later. Okay. Let's go on to the next section. We have a little notes written up for that as well. So let me see. I'm going to put that into the chat. So we're going to be following along with this example here, this exercise, working with docx files. So we're doing something different now. We're going to actually be working inside Microsoft Office itself. If you have a different Word editor that you prefer, you are very free to use that. You can use Google Docs. You can use LibreOffice or OpenOffice. Or I think Pages is the one that's on Macs, perhaps. But we're going to be using 2 different things now. We're going to be doing some writing of code inside the playground, and we're going to be using a separate editor to create our documents. Let me actually do a new share so you can see both of those at once. And you'll be able to see me following along with my notes too. I'm going to make a new file in my playground. I'm going to call it hello docx. And I need to put at least one thing in here before I can hit save, by the way. So not a bad idea to always have those 3 separator dashes. Even at the first section of your code, you don't need it at the top, but it's great if you want to change the order of blocks. You don't have to realize, oh, I forgot those on line 1. So I can hit save. By the way, it will add the .yaml for you if you need that. So that's something to know too. If you forget that, docassemble will save you from yourself there a little bit. I'm going to also open up Microsoft Office. And let's just follow along here, and we'll just dissect what happens here after that. So I'm going to just literally type into my Word file 2 curly brackets and the words user_name and hello, comma.
So Quinten, why does this look different than displaying variables in the docassemble interview? Remember we use like the $ and single curly braces for that?
Great question.
Why is this different?
Yeah, so this is a place where you're going to have to learn relatively small variations from what we did inside our main question inside the interview YAML files. This is the first one. So rather than using $, that style of marking where our variables go, the first thing to know is in a docx file, we use double curly brackets like this. If you wanted to do like more research and figure out, well, what's going on exactly? You might realize that it might be helpful to know the syntax there is called Jinja when we're inside a Word document. And inside our interview YAML file, the syntax that we use there is called Mako, M-A-K-O. Notice what we're not doing here as well. Michael's asking, would you still save the document as docx? Yes, it does need to be literally a docx file when you save it. So make sure you're using Word's new file format, or another name for it in other programs might be OpenOffice XML. But if you have that extension .docx, then it'll be the right type of file. We didn't have to do like anything funky with insert fields inside Word, right? Like you might have to do with mail merge. We're just literally typing in characters into our Word file. Again, let's just take a little bit of a snapshot here to save a little bit of time. If you want to go into the sample and type that in, click the copy button, you can copy it right into your playground as well. Let's save it there. Now we get a syntax error. Anybody have a guess for a step that maybe we're missing? That I'm missing, that is. I worked in my docx file. I'm working in the playground. What do I have to do to make them be able to see each other?
So the document is not uploaded?
Yeah, upload. That's exactly right. We could try clicking this upload button. But if I hover over it, you'll see here, it says upload a YAML file to the playground. And that is not what we're trying to do. I'm going to introduce you to, there are several sections of the playground. We've been working inside the part where you design your interviews. But when you want to work with templates, which is what that file is called, we have to go to a different area of the playground, which we get to by the folders menu here. I'm going to go right to templates. We don't have to work with any of these other areas yet. I can open that in a new window or a new tab. I'm going to upload my file now. And I can click upload. Now I like my file name to not have any spaces in it. Docassemble will handle like making your file name nice to be uploaded to a server, but that can be not what you expect. So it's nice to have them have the same names in both places, on your computer and in Docassemble's playground area. So don't use spaces, don't use commas or any other kind of illegal characters. Just use regular letters and underscores, and you can use dashes as well. But a good idea is to avoid those unless you unless they're actually really part of the file name. Now I still see the syntax error. That's expected because there's no way for Docassemble to know anything has changed. I can hit refresh, and that message should go away. Has everybody gotten to this point so far? And we'll explore a little bit about what happened after that. Give everybody just like another 10 or 15 seconds. So again, you could just copy both of those parts from the demonstration here on the help page that we created. This is what's going to go in your docx file. This is what's going to go in your playground. Then you need to upload it through the folders templates area. Let's do a save and run and see what happens. Okay, so it's asking for my name. Let's stick with Scotty. I get to a download screen. So there are a lot of cool things that are happening here that we didn't really have to customize at all. They kind of come out of the box. So I get this little email box here. I'm logged in with my email. That's the default email address it will fill in for me. I can open the file in PDF or docx. Let's see what happens with the PDF. All right, the name that I typed got put into the file in the right place, which is exactly what I was hoping would happen. If I wanted to open it in docx, I can do that. And again, it has my words replaced anything text that was in the double brackets with the variables that I put in there. And I can even email it to myself if I want to. And I can email just the PDF, or I can include both files, the PDF and the docx. I see a message in the chat. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah.
So David asked, is docx the recommended format for Docassemble in terms of retaining the formatting of text files? Yeah, you have a couple of options when it comes to templates. You can work with PDFs. You can create documents from scratch where you never actually open up a template. You're only working inside the interview file. That's another way to create documents. You can go down to the level of, and someone had asked this early on in the signups for Docassemble when I sent out that survey, can you use LaTeX? Yes, you can. LaTeX is the underlying engine Docassemble uses for creating documents when you create them from scratch. And there are ways to dive in deep and have like super control over the formatting and get really advanced typesetting. But kind of these are the main ways you're going to do it. You're either going to create it in the document without any of that crazy LaTeX stuff. It's actually really easy to do. You're going to use Word documents, which are the most flexible, I find. Or you can use PDFs. And sometimes you're stuck using a PDF. You have no choice because you have a form that the court created, and you have to fill in that form exactly as it is. And then PDF's your only option. But docx is the best mix of power and control over formatting for me.
Quinten, can we go back through selecting a template again?
Yes.
Just real quick through that workflow.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm here in my main playground window. I'm going to go to Folder, then Templates. This takes me to a new area of the playground. And from here, I can choose what file I want to upload by clicking Browse.
So in one note, you can upload multiple files to your templates folder, and they'll show up as rows, like under Hello World. If you had Hello World 2, Hello World 3, all as separate files, Docassemble stores those for you here in the templates folder, so you can use them in any interview. They all kind of go in this one location, in this one bucket.
And you also notice that I uploaded the same file again, and I overwrote the one that was already in my playground because it has the same file name. So that's something to keep in mind. When you make changes, you can use this flow right here that we just did. To get back to the playground, I can scroll down. I can use that button there, or I can use the back button here. They both did the same thing in this case. Okay, so let's just try a couple of things. In our docx, why is this a nice format to use? Well, one is we can do all the normal Microsoft Word things. I can do things like make it bold. I can make it different color. That's a little hard to see, but let's try changing the background color. And I can insert an image. Let's see. Not sure if that really is Creative Commons, but I guess Bing thinks it is. I'll trust its word. So the point is here, and if you're not following everything that I just did, that's okay. The point here is you have total control over how you format your document, and you can use a tool that you already are familiar with, which is Microsoft Word. So now if I did a new save and run, my PDF is going to have all those things I just changed about it, right? And so you can hand over and maybe more easily divide responsibilities for updating your templates when you keep those as Microsoft Word files. So it's the right trade-off is different for everybody, but I find it to be a pretty accessible type of way to work with files. A cool thing I've done for a few of my clients when I was at Greater Boston Legal Services is if you already are invested in Office 365 as a platform, obviously it has the online editor built into it. You can do things like keep your templates live inside. Yes, and Peter, you're getting right to the question I was about to hit to next. But yeah, let me just hit one thing, which is, yeah, you can have a library of documents in something like SharePoint. You can edit them live, and you can pull them live into Docassemble. It's not exactly a built-in feature, but because we have access to Python, we can use Microsoft's APIs to pull in files from SharePoint. And your templates don't have to be something you manually upload. You can have them in some central place and then work with them in Docassemble. It's like one of the really nice, powerful things about Docassemble. Yeah, okay, yes, and CM just answered Peter's question again. Yeah, that's totally right. So I think that might be the next thing for us to do, is to show how you can use logic inside a template. Let's change our hello docx YAML file a little bit. And let's just do this. Let's make a new question. We're going to use our 3 dashes to start the new question block. Start out the question specifier. I always like to use this vertical pipe, even if what comes next is only going to be one line. It can help you avoid errors. I won't go into it too much, but it's just a best practice, which is good to follow. Let's see. Let's say we wanted to include some optional text inside our document, which is a very common thing. Like, that's the whole point. You have a master template. Different clauses are used in different circumstances for different people. Let's start out by doing a really basic type of question, which is buttons where someone can answer yes or no. That's a new type of question. We're not going to use the field statement right now for this variation. There's a way to do it inside the field statement that we can go over as well. And there's a whole section that Sam did where he goes over some different question types, which is in the page that I linked everybody to. So this is just a shortcut way. When you want one screen to show to the user that just asks a yes or no question, you can use this shortcut, yes, no, colon, at least one space, and we give it a variable name on the right. Now, another variation. This is the other main difference that you need to know between working inside the YAML file and working inside a docx. This is the text we want to make optional. We have to surround it in some way with something that tells docassemble, make it optional. Anyone have a guess for what we're going to do? What type of logic we need to use here? If statement, exactly. So Aditya and Michael both caught on that. And there was a guess that maybe it's if it's mandatory. Yeah, so we're going to use an if statement. This is what if statements look like inside a docx file. And again, this is the Jinja 2 syntax, which you may not have to know the name, but if you ever were stuck and like wanted to look up something, that's what you would look up. So I'm going to show you the way that I think is the best way to write it. And we'll break it down a little bit. So I'll give everybody a moment just to, and I'll copy this into, we have an example a lot like it actually already on the web page that you've all been given. I'll put it on the chat as well, just so you get that syntax just right. So let's read what this is doing. So first of all, we have our curly bracket still, but this time we don't have two of them in a row. We have a % and we have the P. What that's telling docassemble is we're doing a paragraph level if statement. That's what the P means. It stands for paragraph. Then we have the keyword if, that's exactly like in Python. And then we have the thing we're testing. So let's start with this. So why, anyone have a guess? Why did I not write it like this? And this is, by the way, this is what we do, just like we did mandatory true. There's a, for truth and false in Python, it's going to be either the capital T true or capital T F false. Those are the two ways we would write it, true and false. Anyone have a guess why we didn't do this? Why we didn't have to? I think there's some Python folks in here. Yeah, so Michael says, if it's a true false, simply writing the variable assumes true. And then Aditya has a similar point. If it's a yes, no question in Python, assumes it's going to be a yes. So when we write out our if statement, we're saying, is the statement that follows equivalent to true or false? So writing out the equivalent to true second time isn't necessary, because include clause is itself either going to be true or false.
What are you doing, man?
I think that's maybe a little bit complicated for people, but let's just try saving it. Let's run it, and then I'm going to show you what the value looks like inside our interview by using the source button again. By the way, we've just shown another way to trigger variables. You can have them triggered by a template file, and that's something that will happen whether you mean it or not. Sometimes you have a variable that's used in your template file and you forgot to have a question for it. So that's an error that you might run into. But I never had to say to mark these questions mandatory. The fact that they're referenced in this attachment that's in a mandatory block is enough to trigger the questions being looked for. Okay, I'm gonna click the source button and just take a look at what the value is of include clause. It's true. So it has a value itself. When we were writing our test before, we had user name is not true or false, right? It has some text value. So to turn it into a true or false value, we had to turn it into a full expression. Username is equal to Scotty is either true or false, but include clause is already equal to either true or false. So we don't have to do that double writing of the expression. I think that this version of it is a lot more readable, and it will encourage you to use variable names that make sense. So we kind of have that, that verb noun pattern here when we're using variable names. And if you do that, your code is readable, that is, and other people understand what it does better. And the more we can avoid like extra things like having that, the better. It's not important. If you wanted to try it out the other way, that's fine, but just wanted to highlight that for people. Now I'm just gonna go over a couple of points in the Slack, in the chat that is. First, Sam pointed out the other difference about our statement here. We have this new clause that we didn't use in our Python if statement. It's called end if. Anybody have a guess for why we might need that when we're working in a docx file? And a guess is fine, doesn't have to be an answer. Okay, well, the answer is we're mixing logic and display stuff in the same place, right? Yeah, David is exactly right. That's a really good explanation. So David, you want to just unmute and explain what you're kind of thinking there with that point?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, because what I'm trying to say is that since the document has text that you always want to have there, and it's not code, it's not conditional, then you have to let Word know what is code and what isn't, and that would be the way to do that.
Exactly, yeah. So inside Jinja, we have this special extra clause. It's not part of Python itself, but it's necessary because we need to show the beginning and the end of our conditional text. We can still use other types of code here, by the way. We could have done an else if. That's exactly the same. To negate a value, I just use the keyword not, by the way. So if not, include clause. And then we could have done an else statement. I need to be consistent with my P's here. Find your P's and percents. This doesn't really make a lot of sense, obviously, because there's only two possible options for it. It's either true or false here. Okay. Now, yes, so Sam just answered the question about including multiple fields inside one statement. The answer is yes, you can do that. This style of question where you have a button can be a lot easier to interact with inside a mobile phone. But if you wanted to mix them in one, you could. So this is what it would look like if we did that. This is a section that we kind of skipped, which is different types of fields that you can ask. You have a different keyword that we use. Notice the indentation. It matches up with the first text inside the label. Data type, yes, no. So it's a little bit different, two different ways to ask a question. Peter asks, can graphics be added with the optional clause? The answer is yes. You can include anything you like in the optional text because it's just Microsoft Word saying, okay, show this paragraph or hide this paragraph. Anything you like can go inside there. This is what you get by default when we just say yes, no. Is a checkbox. There's other ways for us to customize it. I'll show you a few. Because yes, no is obviously one of the most helpful types of data of questions you're going to be asking. First is using radio buttons. The nice thing about using radio buttons is you can make sure someone answers it and affirmatively chooses a yes or a no. Whereas checkboxes, if someone leaves it blank, you assume that they don't want it to be checked, but maybe they just didn't read the question carefully enough. So radio buttons can be really nice UI here. Buttons can be a really nice UI as well because they're easy to interact with on a mobile phone and don't require you to do two things. Another way for us to do this would have been, I don't know if you noticed that checkbox was like a little funky when it was compared to the other text that didn't have a label. So if you want to make it wider and take up the full width of the input area, we can use yes, no, wide. So those are three different ways to show a yes, no question. Let me actually keep both the examples intact. I'm going to put this as an example here. There's our current progress, by the way. So this now shows you like really the basics of doing something a little bit fancier than mail merge with just a couple of lines of code inside your docassemble environment. Let's see. So there are a couple of other things I wanted to point on for you all. Let's see. One is that we use the %p style. You might want to play around with that a little bit on your own and see what happens when you don't use the p in that. That still works. I don't think I've uploaded this yet, but so let's go ahead and see if we can catch what's different. if you get rid of those P's. Just so you can remind yourself about that later. Not ready to go. So by the way, the only one that really matters here is this include super clause. The other ones didn't do anything yet. I'm not using those in my docx file. So notice here, we have a couple of extra empty lines, right? If you have a bunch of optional clauses, you don't want to end up with a bunch of empty lines that don't do anything. So that P is what removes that. We covered a lot just then. There's lots more we can talk about, but first I wanted to pause for questions. What questions do people have so far? How does auto numbering of bullet points work when we show and hide different clauses? Great question. And let's use our other variables we just added for that. Yeah, and David's question is, what does the P mean?
I found Donald Trump's phone number and I added to a call.
So Barbara asked, what is a scanner error? Remember, that was the one that means there's something wrong with the syntax of your YAML file. So it might be like an extra space in the wrong place. For Ladeirdre, that was like a space at the beginning of her 3 brackets. I find I make that mistake a lot. So I would check all of your separators, but also feel free to copy and paste the code that we have in the chat. So just to talk about auto numbering. Okay, let's say we have a bunch of numbered items. This is how you handle it. And I'm going to just take a look and see what I had in my other variables. We had include other and include other more. This is what the %P does. Having the P in there means it will delete the whole paragraph. And in Microsoft Word, that means it will delete the numbered item too. So I think on your own time, maybe give that a try. What would happen if you didn't have the P in there is we would always have 6 numbered items, but some of them would be empty. And having the P there means it deletes that paragraph. After it's finished evaluating what's inside the %, it will remove that line. So we don't want to include other stuff on that line, by the way, because then it will delete stuff we didn't want it to delete. But it's really, the form that you're going to use pretty often is this %P, where you're deleting a whole paragraph if it's not going to be something you want in your interview or not. Amani asked, tips for checking Jinja in your Word document. In terms of getting helpful error messages, unfortunately, you're a little stuck. The error messages are not so great. This is using a library that wasn't written by Jonathan, that someone else created to do the filling. And the error messages aren't so good for working in a long docx file. But a couple of techniques I use, I'm assuming that Amani's already been doing some work inside docx's, or maybe you're just running into the error right now. First thing is, if you have a bunch of conditional statements, that's a really good place to run into errors, right? So I like to check to make sure they all match. So I look for matching brackets that open a conditional statement and that they match the number of closing ones. That's a really common error message you might get. So if those didn't both equal 8, I would know there's a problem. Next tip. We talked about using comments to add information for the next person who's looking at your code or for you to remind yourself. But you can also use comments to do debugging. So Jinja has comments built in. This is how you do a comment in Jinja. It's a curly bracket and a pound sign to open and close the comment. You can go over multiple lines. When I have a problem in a long Word file, my #1 troubleshooting tip is to comment out half of it at a time and kind of partition down until you find out which part of your file has the problem. And you can use Jinja comments to do that. It is a pretty iterative thing. Technically, you can use those error messages to find out a little bit more, but it's just like a little annoying the way that it works. And I won't get into ways you could use that. It will tell you there's a problem. Sometimes it will tell you like what type of problem it has. Like it's pretty good at telling you you have an if statement, but not the matching end if. Sometimes it's not so helpful, the error message you get. Sudhakar has asked, is it possible to remove a column from a table based on user's input? The answer is yes. We can use if statements inside a table as well, and you can use them over table rows or table columns. And I'm sure for some of you, this is like exactly what you were looking for. Some of you, this is probably like, I'm lost at the earlier step. That's okay. That's the great thing about having a recording. I'm going to try to take some time to get to everybody's questions, including problems people ran into. If we want to delete a table row, we can make it conditional by using %, and we have 2 new symbols here that we're going to learn. TC means table column, TR means table row. This is really powerful. So it's going to affect the whole row that is on. You don't have to change it so it's all in one row. It's okay just to put it in the first cell. And if we want to do the same type of thing with a table, but doing it over the column instead, and hold on, I better make sure this is the right syntax for you all, in case you're looking at this. That will delete the whole column. And again, it's looking down. You don't have to merge those cells, so it's all one big column. It's going to be looking down through the table that you're working in. There is a lot of information about working in docx in the docassemble documentation. Not everything is there. If you wanted to learn more, I've included some links at the very end with some more reading. And you're going to want to look at this Jinja reference here. And technically, you want to use this one for docx template, #5, but I find the one at #4 has some slight differences, but it's like way more comprehensive. So you might want to like look at this one, and if something doesn't quite work the way you want to, look at this one to see, oh, there was a variation. And this is really when you get into more advanced things that aren't part of the docassemble documentation. A lot of things are covered right there, right inside the section here. Filippo has asked, is there some reference for LaTeX? Not really. That's kind of beyond the scope of what docassemble really tries to do. This is like kind of like painting a little bit outside of the lines, but it's good to know you can do it. And actually, by the way, I mean, what you get with docassemble is an interview and a way to generate questions that you show to the user and collect things. You don't have to use its built-in way to create documents at all. If you want to, there's some functions that let you work with the docx file at a lower level. And those are probably like not something you want to do lightly, but you can technically. I don't think there's any information here about docs. I think it shows you how to do LaTeX style sheets. Yeah, I'm not gonna, so this is what I say is your number one friend, is the documentation on docassemble.org is really covers pretty much everything. And what you need to do is like figure out, what do I need right now? How do I find the thing that I need to do what my goal is? But most things are described there once you know what to look for. Mandy has asked, can you add images and change the color scheme inside the YAML file? The answer is images for sure. Color scheme, I would have to check to see if that's one of the options inside for formatted text. I'm actually not 100% sure you can do that easily with a function that's there right now. But you could obviously get around that by using conditional logic inside your document, right? To change the color. It would make it more complicated, but it's definitely possible to do it there. Yeah, I think the answer is yes for controlling color and other types of very basic styles. But I actually would have to look it up. So you can do formatted text, and I think this is where there might be some ways to insert raw docx styles that you can do, but probably beyond our scope right now. Images, let's just show you like how much power you get from docassemble. I mean, we've just kind of scratched the surface today. All I need to get an upload box to come up in my window. So I can actually make it more specific. I can make it an image. Okay. Let me see if I can remember what that is called actually. I do this, by the way, all the time. I'm looking up things in the documentation. I don't memorize every possible thing here. So I'm going to look at setting variables. And this is where you're going to find a lot of documentation about different types of inputs you can use. And I thought there was a way to limit it to an image that was kind of built in. It might be just, I think the camera would do that, but I'm not going to use that right now. Okay. This is not using that, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. Stick with file as our type. Oh, you can see the Zoom chat window. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that was happening. Okay, let's see. This is a little dangerous here, probably. All right, hold on. Let me find a good picture to upload for you. Now it's inside my file. I made a bunch of changes in a row, which I don't recommend. It's good to be iterative and to test your progress as you go along. And I haven't uploaded my file yet either. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Upload my revised file to the template area. See if I have any errors. Might be a good test for everybody. Before I make the change to put in the variable for the image. Make sure it still runs. Shoot, I gotta go back there. Okay, let's make sure that I can use my document. Okay, so that's pretty good. I typed a bunch of syntax without testing it and it worked. Oh, I actually, it was commented out. That's why, part of the reason. Okay. Inside our docx, to insert an image, it's exactly like any other variable. So I named that upload. Save it, re-upload it. And I can just actually hit back here and refresh it. I don't have to, well, this doesn't really matter because it was only one screen. Now I get my image inside it. So it was literally just as simple as just any other variable. Upload becomes a picture that can be inserted into the template. There's one limit for this, which is you can't use this for inside a header and footer. You can't insert an image into a header and footer. Okay, can you set height and width on an inserted image? Yes, you can. I don't remember off the top of my head how to do that inside a docx file, but you can certainly control. Yeah, actually, I don't know the answer to how to do it in the docx file. Sorry about that.
Dot show width equals whatever.
Thanks. And this is going to be in pixels, I'm assuming, right?
No, it use a string and set it to like 2 in or something for inches.
Oh, it's okay. It gets passed to Microsoft Word. You could probably use centimeters there, or what kind of limits?
Yeah, it accepts centimeters, millimeters, points.
Okay. But we need to specify the unit.
That's pretty small. Okay, so other questions that people have so far? And we're coming up towards the end of this morning's session. We could certainly keep going for questions, though. I don't have a hard stop. Not hearing any questions. Anything that you wanted to add, Jonathan? Anything else to clarify? No. Amani has a question.
Okay. Is it possible to set default values for fields in the interview? The answer is yes, it is definitely possible. A lot like this data type modifier. Same indentation level. It's the default keyword. And then we have, for this example, it can be either true or false because it's a yes, no. For the username, capitalization. So you can't, to my knowledge, I don't know that you can do a default for an upload, but the other types we have on the screen can all get defaults. Okay. Amani asked, can we talk about moving an interview off of the, or Joy rather, asked, can we move an interview from the playground and create a package with it? And I think that the answer is yes. I think we have time to do that. This might lose a few people, but again, you can come back to the recording and look at it later, and I'll direct people to this area of the documentation too. So if we went to docassemble.org/ and then we clicked on the documentation link, and we went to, oh geez, where's the packages? Oh, here we go, development packages. You could learn more about this there. And so I will just show you the very, very basics of it, which is a potentially complex thing. Okay, so first, what are packages? We get to the package area of the playground by going to folders, packages. We can give our package a name. Lots of other things we can change, but those defaults are mostly fine. Now, when we scroll down, the things that you're going to probably almost always touch are this list of interview files and the template files. So you need to select the ones that you want to include. When they're selected, they're highlighted. Even if there's only one thing there, it's not actually in the package. I can scroll down, I can put lots of other information here. We don't have any static files, source files, or modules, so that's just blank. The README is information that you can use to the next person who wants to use your package. I'm gonna click Save. Now my files are in a package, but that package itself doesn't live anywhere else once I've saved it. So like kind of an interesting thing you can do is you can download the package. Now all your files are in one place, and you can share it with somebody else. This is it turns into a zip file with this folder structure here. So you get like 4 levels deep basically before you get to the part where your code really lives. The YAML files go in the questions folder, and templates go in the templates folder. So now you have a package you can install somewhere else. You can use this install button here to install it right into your server. I almost never use this button. I find that installing packages from the playground like that is not a good habit. If more than one person's using your server. If it's just you, it may not matter, but once you get to more than one person, it can become a problem. So I like to use this package management menu to do it. And then I can, especially it's helpful when I'm using GitHub to control the version of my files, then it's really helpful to use the package menu to install them, because then I can update them with one click. Like here you see the update buttons there. If I click update, it's going to pull in the newest version of that package. If I install my packages on GitHub, I can get that same version update behavior right inside the docassemble environment. But for this very simple example, I'm going to go ahead and click install. If you named your package the same thing, we're all going to be overwriting, I think. Nope, actually, probably not, right, Jonathan? I think it's going to do some package protection on this server. It's not set up to allow 2 people to use the same package name.
Somebody might get an error if they try to do it after you.
Okay.
But yeah, you could be overwriting your friend's stuff. So I recommend having your own server.
It's another good reason to use the package management menu too. But I mean, once you start getting into multiple people using it, there's lots of good practices. At Suffolk, we're doing this pretty well. We have, like I said, probably like 30 different people who've had developer accounts, and we figured out some good workflows for doing that on one server. Now it's installed, but how do I actually access it is the tricky part for people, I think. And it's not like made that discoverable inside the docassemble interface. So now it's installed. We have to remember a couple things. First, we have to remember our package name, Docacon. And we have to remember the name of our interview file itself, hello docx. So how do you get those pieces of information? The way I like to do it, the simplest way, is just to click the run button or the save and run, either one is fine. And then you're going to inspect this URL here that's right in your browser window. And replace the part where it says playground in a number. Just that part right there. And replace that with the name of your package. You don't need anything after the hash symbol. So this is the name of my package that's installed on the server. And then the name of my interview file. This %3a, that's like HTML formatting. It's really just the colon symbol character. So this is a URL I could share with people to have the installed version of my file that I just created. Notice what this means. So I now have two different versions of the same file on the server. One that I've installed, you can kind of use this to control an interview that's in development. So you can be editing your file that's on your playground while you've already shared out a link for other people to use to the final version of your file. So you can be updating them both at once. So I do save and run here. This is my test environment, but when I go to that URL that has the package name in it, instead of playground, I'm getting the version that's installed on the server. That's a more final version of the interview. So this is like a really basic way to control and version access to your material. So it's a great thing to do. I think we have time to show one more thing, which is this is like another thing that's going to happen pretty early on. You're going to want to be doing things like this. If we go to the configuration, actually, I'm thinking this is going to, we would say something like hello docx, and then we have not the whole URL here, just the package name, followed by a colon, and then the name of the interview file. So I'm hoping, Joy, this is responsive to what you're trying to do, because I'm guessing you probably want to do something like this pretty early on. Give people nicer URLs to use. Anytime you change the configuration, it restarts the server. That's not actually something that's really disruptive for people, because it waits until they finish the thing that they've been working on. If they are on a screen literally at that moment, it won't stop them from being able to work. Now, I can send out a URL to people like this. And what did I call it? Hello docx. So that can be the link I send people instead. So I'll just show you what that would look like. There's more we can do as well. So and now I'm trying to remember, Jonathan, you might remember, what's the keyword for adding that available interviews list? So yeah, you can share this with people if you have a bunch of interviews, and you can totally customize the appearance of this. It's not so fancy by default, but you can show all the interviews you have installed on your server if you wanted to share this URL with people.
And it's currently called untitled, but you can give it other titles with the metadata. block.
Yeah, that was another section that we didn't get to. I will point people out to it. So there's some, this is again, something that is kind of a fun thing to play around with. We didn't get to today, but here's a little bit of documentation about how to do that in your interview. And I'm happy to stay for like another 15 minutes. I'm respectful of, oh yeah, Michael says it's show dispatch link is the configuration. Thanks for that, Michael. If you want to do things like change the title of your interview, probably you want to do that like almost right away. You can also change the appearance of your interview by using a theme file. And so this page, and also decorate it with images. Let's see. Maybe I'll leave you with that, not just to show you like, oh, what does that mean? Check this out later. I won't try to do it live on the call. This interview is kind of fun. What is it? Default. Remember the keyword?
No, I never. Maybe I was thinking of a different thing. You're talking about enabling the
Font awesome.
The font awesome.
Yeah. Icons. Okay. Okay. I've been turning on this configuration option. Actually, I just should have remembered that I had that in my instructions that I gave to everybody already. Okay, so once I've turned that on, this will be a fun. So Font Awesome is like a really cool big library of images, icons you can use, and you can do things like create buttons that use those images in them. So this, I didn't have to install these pictures. I'm linking to an external library of images, and I can use them right inside elements that people interact with on the screen. Okay, that's just a fun thing to play around with later. Joy says, when using my shared link to an interview, will people need a password to access it? And does that depend on how my server is set up? Yes, it depends on how your server is set up. And you can also configure it on a per interview basis. So there are lots of ways to control access to your interviews. You can require people to be logged in. You can require them to be logged in with a specific privilege. So I'll just show you what privilege means. I can set up as many as I like, but these are the ones that it starts out with. You can give each user one of these different privileges, and you can say for each individual interview, you can only access it if you have the customer privilege, for example. I set up a lot of people with login using Office 365, which I think is a really nice feature. So then you're not maintaining passwords on your server at all. When someone updates their email password for getting into Outlook, it's going to update their ability to access your docassemble server. Docassemble never stores the password. It can use Microsoft servers to ask, hey, does this person have permission to log in? And Microsoft is the only place the password's ever typed. So some different ways to control access there. Those are covered pretty well in documentation. Let me just see if I can find, let me see. Like I said, you can set that up as a server-wide setting, limiting who can register and asking everyone to be logged in before they can access any interviews. Or you can do it interview by interview. And that is in one of these initial blocks here. And I would just look for, let's see.
I think it's under metadata.
Okay.
Required privileges.
Yeah. So this is an interview with only admins and developers or advocates can use by adding this block to the top of our interview file. Okay, most of the messages I'm getting now are like people saying that they had to to leave, and we are 10 minutes over. Any last questions? All right, well, thank you everybody so much. Again, this recording is going to go up online soon. You can access the website indefinitely. Your training server account is going to expire in a couple of days, Jonathan. Maybe, I don't know if you know.
I'm paying by the minute, so I'm going to terminate it after today.
Okay.
So this video that's been recording, it'll be uploaded on YouTube. Is it possible you can send the video on Slack, or how can we access it?
Yeah, check the Docacon channel on Slack.
Okay, so that won't be deleted.
Video is going to stay up.
Video will stay, yeah.
And the Docacon is not going to go away after today either.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Maybe it can go up on docacon.com. Is it .com or .org?
I wasn't going to distribute the videos that publicly just because it has people's faces in them, but I was going to put it on Slack and email it to the registrants.
Okay. Michael has a question. Are templates encrypted on the server?
No.
Yeah, templates are not encrypted. Your connection to the server is encrypted, but they're not encrypted at rest. If that makes sense. I think someone that makes sense to. Is it possible to encrypt them at rest? Well, yeah, I mean, the one way I can think of doing it would be to not use S3 if you're using AWS, which is what I usually use, and then to have encryption turned on your AWS instance or your Lightsail instance, whatever server you're using. So if that's like a requirement for you for regulatory reasons, you can do that. But it is not it's not something that's configured at a docassemble level. It's a server level setting at that point. Michael points out that your answers are encrypted at rest, which is correct. By default, everything that your users type in is encrypted. That sometimes bites people. You can definitely turn that feature off on a per interview basis if you want more than one person to be able to view the same answers. But by default, they are all encrypted with the user's username and password.
Barbara asks if there is a server that they can continue to use for training, and there is not. You would have to find your own server. They cost money to host, so there's no free server anywhere.
It does cost about $20 a month to run your own docassemble server on Amazon Lightsail. And that is something that I help a number of people do. If you are looking at doing that for a nonprofit, then there are, like in Massachusetts, for example, we're hosting a lot of people's content. Illinois, I think we'll be doing that soon for people in Illinois and in Maine. Oh, New Hampshire, actually, sorry, not Maine. Mirabella asks, can you run locally on your computer for practice? You can. Yeah, it's not the best because it expects to be running all the time. So it's a way to get a little bit of play in, but it's not going to be the best experience when you close your computer and things go to sleep, things might break.
Yeah, Docker is not well adapted to having the machine turned off and on a lot, unfortunately.
Oh, so Bill's saying that VPS AG. So Bill, can you tell us what size instance is that for €5 a month? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, if it's just 2 gigabytes, you could encounter problems when updating software. I would use a bigger server.
I mean, you might be just fine. So here we go. So this is, let's see, €10 is what you need for, oh, you still only get 2 gigs of RAM for 10. €7 looks like it would be fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's actually a pretty good deal. There are a lot of things that are really nice about using AWS, or at least to use S3, because it will help store your backups and such. And people can't use S3 and AWS for regulatory reasons, so that's a whole different question. You can run it on your own server in your server closet at your office, and that's fine too. Okay, I think this is a good place for us to stop, but I will leave room for like maybe 1 or 2 last questions. It's okay if you don't have any as well.
Well,
all right.
Thanks very much, Quinten. Excellent job. I wasn't here for the whole thing, but I had to go to another meeting, but this has been very good, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending. Hope to see everybody in the afternoon for Jonathan's going to be doing a session about working with lists, which should be really exciting, really nice way to unlock more of the power of docassemble. What time is that again?
2
2
Eastern time. So
about
it's
2
in
hours from now.
a little less than 2 hours.
I will see everybody.
All right.